guys, this is Hunter Levine, and I'm enjoying some amazing Florida weather. And I'm really grateful that you decided to check out this podcast series called Field Notes, where my friend John Dunaway and I sit down and compare different things that we've learned from amazing men and women in the outdoor world. Last episode, we talked about something really important, and that is how to hunt and fish more. And today's episode, we talk about how to not suck forever. When you're trying to grow in the things that you love in the outdoors, sometimes it can be frustrating to feel like you're not making improvements. And John and I have learned some things from people around us about how to get better at the things that we really love doing, whether it's fishing or hunting, riding mountain bikes, or whatever your outdoor pursuit may be. We're not gurus, but we're fortunate enough to be able to see some things that people implement in their life that help them go to the next level. And we hope that this podcast shares some insight on that for you. If you're enjoying this podcast, please help us out by leaving a review. And of course, it goes a long way for you to share this podcast with people you know. Thanks again. We hope you enjoy. This is the Captain's Collective.
All right. Well, hey, John, thanks for another opportunity to compare some field notes together. And today's topic is going to be how to not suck forever.
Ooh, strong. Let's go.
So I think a big part of any time you start something, unless, you're some sort of huge exception to the rule, is that you're going to be a beginner. You're going to be a novice. And some people might come in with transferable skills or whatever. There might be some little exceptions, but the reality is if you want to get good at something, you have to be willing to suck at it. And it's kind of like if you're going to climb a mountain, at some point you got to be willing to stand at the foot of it, And so I'm curious about, with all the different guys that you've, from hunting to fishing to photography, videography, even in your experience as being a captain, like what does it look like for people to pursue getting out of the novice stage, and how do they become more experts in their field?
Yeah. We talked about it in the first episode, that purpose, trust, focus, camaraderie. I think you take two of those components. You've got purpose. Purpose is that I want to be a better duck hunter, let's say. Or let's do fly fishing because we were kind of talking about it at another time. Well, that's a giant task to tackle, but you can focus it. So, for example, let's say you can only fish 2 times out of the month. And because you don't fish a bunch, when you get out and you've chose to go do it on your own, right? So you don't have a ton of time on the water. You don't really know what the fish are doing. You're going to get out there. Say you're going to get 5 chances to throw a fish. Mm-hmm. Well, you want to be better at this. Like, should I have better gear? Should I know every knot to be able to tie? What all do I need to do? Well, let's take one component that you think with your own time you could excel at. Well, you could practice casting. You can cast at your house. You can go to a park, like right around the corner from wherever you live. Do you want to show up, have 5 chances at fish, and because you didn't spend the time learning to cast, you're gonna get on them 1 out of 5? Or you took your time when you weren't there, practiced your casting to get really efficient, and 4 out of those 5 chances, you're gonna be able to put that fly in front of that fish. Mm-hmm. Well, if you can only go twice and you got 10 total chances at this, you want to get on them 2 out of 10, or do you want to get 8 out of 10? Mm-hmm. So you want to suck less? You're not going to be the pro, right? You're not going to be the guru, as I say, but you can be a lot better with your casting. And if that increases the rewards that come out of it, well, then there you go.
Yeah. And when you're trying to get good at anything, like, let's just say that you're trying to learn a language and you want to be quote unquote fluent in said language, the way that you need to start is, okay, I want to speak Spanish. So I could just start learning random words, random things as they come to me. But if I were to use like an app like a Babbel or Rosetta Stone or whatever, what they're going to do is they're going to say, here are, 80% of what you say is going to be 20% of the words, because there's a repetition. So the first thing to do is to take what you want to get good at. You want to be a great duck hunter, okay, well, what does that mean? So I get around some guys who are really good at it and began to try to unpack, what are those skills that I need to be good at? So, well, you need to be able to shoot. You need to be able to see birds, and you need to understand how to camouflage yourself and not move in the blind at the wrong times. And then begin to to flesh those things out. And then I look at like, okay, like if I can get those things dialed down, that's going to be, maybe it's calling, and you kind of deconstruct, like you start at the end, you deconstruct it, and then you focus on the primary, you mentioned in the first episode, Legos, what are the big building blocks? And then there's all these nice little touches. But if you just kind of just start to like aimlessly go through, you may miss some important things, or you might just misallocate some time where like you see guys who are really, really good at fly tying, but they're not good at casting, or, guys who are really good at duck calling, but they, aren't good at shooting, or whatever it may be. So I think you first want to start with, okay, when I'm around older anglers, like casting is one that I'm really trying to work at. And there's a combination of you get frustrated because you go out there and you miss opportunities, and this thing that like you cannot be a great angler if you cannot cast well. It will not happen. Now, whether you tie your own flies or, whether you understand X, Y, Z. And so I think that's like an important part is like if you're actually going to put it on a piece of paper and go backwards, writing out like what are these things that I want to be able to master and be good at, and then to start to break those things down, and even we just came off a conversation about time. Like you can probably make time to go to the shooting range and shoot clays and work on your shooting, or invest the money in getting some coaching, or whatever that may be. But I think you have to actually have a plan, I guess. Like there's this phrase, nobody drifts into greatness, accidentally become great. Sure. It's a book called Good to Great. And that's the idea, is like people don't just accidentally become great at something. Like, and so if you can make a map, it's like if you go into the gym, you're not just going to throw 400 on the bar and squat it, right?
Sure.
You need to first learn the mechanics. Then you start with 135 or the bar, and then you work your way up. How does that look in the fishing world? And then one thing I would add to that, and I'm curious your thoughts on this, but like a lot of people really struggle at being the novice, and it can be hard because we have pride and we don't want to be the worst shot in the duck blind. We don't want to be the bad caster. But if you don't enjoy the journey up the mountain, you're probably climbing the wrong mountain.
Oh yeah, that's a good way to put it. I mean, our egos get in the way of so much, right?
Yeah.
What said a guy who told me about being on the channel? Like, there's where you should be, there's where you think you are, and there's where you actually are. And
unpack that.
So, like, imagine I move ships right up and down this channel, and there's a certain spot you should probably be for different bends or meeting other ships or whatever it is, right? There's a spot. Well, you may think that you're in the right spot, but maybe you're 50 feet left and you're kind of loading up against this bank in a turn. And then you look at the computer and you're like, oh, I'm actually not 50 feet left to center. I'm like 100 feet left, right? So your perception, the reality, and your, I guess, projected idea or theoretical path don't always line up. So again, it's like take stock in yourself and be brutally honest.
Mm-hmm.
So break it all back down. Oh, I think I'm a good caster. Like, are you really a good caster? Like, it may look good, and then you go, hey, you know what? Maybe I should get a lesson. I mean, with shooting shotguns, right? Like, I shoot quite a bit every year, and I'm proficient enough. I'm not the best one in the blind by far. And then we go to a guy like a couple times a year down the road from the club and does shooting lessons. And he tunes up stuff every time. It's like,
and that's kind of like the system, right? So like there's where you think you are, but then you look at the system you have, the computer system you have to actually tell you where you are.
right.
And if you have pride, people around you, it's going to stop saying stuff to you. You know, they don't want to push against it. You need, like, in life, you need some sort of operating system to say, hey, your cast is falling apart, and here's why. And
Right.
here's how to work at it. And you have the humility to receive it. Or in shooting, I just went through this year. It's like, hey, you think that the reason you're struggling with shooting these birds is because of how you're swinging, but you actually, it's footwork. You're like, oh, I wouldn't have necessarily thought about footwork. It's like, yeah, that's because that guy's a better shot. And he's telling me,
Right.
you think you know why you're not hitting these birds, but actually I'm going to look at you tell you where you're at, tell you where you're wrong, and then give you the adjustment to make.
Yeah, and sometimes they're like big flaws because you're like, hey, I've always done it this way. And because I've always done it this way and it seems to work, I'll just keep doing it. And then somebody that knows what they're really doing and can step back, right, and see it not in your own eyes or in your own egotistical head, like, well, say when you're shooting, I was like, well, instinctually, this guy's a really good shot.
Mm-hmm.
When the bird comes in, he just pulls up and boom, because his ego is gone. He's not like, shoulder the gun, I see the bird, follow, and like all this stuff gets in his head. And then that person that can drop them all the time in a hunt is not good, like in a fixed scenario, because they're thinking so much. And one of the little things that this guy was talking to us about, it's like, because when you guys are doing this, like, you guys throw up and you just shoulder it. And when you throw it up so fast, you seem to hit the exact same spot every single time because you're not thinking about it. But when you're like, oh, okay, pull, here comes the clay, wait for it. You know what, I'm just going to shoulder now. And you're like, you're kind of feeling it. There's so much going on that you get in your own head and mess it up. And that's where somebody from the outside can sit there and watch that.
Yeah.
And then the takeaway was just throw the gun up and then instinctually shoot. Or just get used to just throwing the gun up and you're going to hit that same spot. It's like if you're driving your car and you seem, we're all distracted now, we're doing different things. You're like, huh, I always seem to remember when that turn comes up. Like, did somebody tell you, you know what, when you're 5 feet away from this right-hand turn, you need to be going 20 miles an hour and then begin applying the wheel, right? You don't.
Yeah.
You just instinctually do it.
Mm-hmm.
But if all these other elements get in the way and you're so focused on, you know, somebody saying new, when should I turn the car? I'm like, I don't know. When I was learning to, move ships in the channel, I had a guy that was overseeing me and stuff. It's like, hey, when should I make this turn? And he looked at me. He's like, I don't know. It's like, when it feels right to you. I was like, this is the worst coaching ever.
Yeah.
Like, this isn't helping.
Yeah.
And I realized what he was trying to do. Like, if I teach you exactly how to do it calculated, everything's going to be different every time. And that is the same as like with shooting. Well, if I'm wearing this little t-shirt today and I shoulder it versus midway through the season when I've got a couple layers on, that gun is not sitting in the exact same spot. Right? And like, it kind of changes the way you go up. If I wear gloves versus not wearing gloves, it tends to mess in my own head. I'm like, I don't feel as good a grip on the stock and everything.
Yeah.
But instinctually, you will throw all that out the window and you won't even think about it, right? Because your mind and your eyes are going to take over following that target and shooting at it. Versus if you start thinking about all that stuff, you're just putting up all these roadblocks. So that's a big one. It's like, think less, instinctually go after elements, but then let somebody on the outside look at you and break you down. Get rid of that ego and go, what am I actually doing wrong? I've been shooting shotguns for a long time now, and I get corrected all the time. I was like, that is wrong. That has worked because you have designed a bias in your own mind how to make it happen, but it's kind of like a crutch, right? And if we can get away from that and fix this, then you can build from that better kind of deal.
Yeah, like trying to sharpen those instincts. It's like baseball, you're not, if somebody, I'm not a great baseball player by any means, but if somebody's like, hey, I need you to throw this baseball and hit John's couch over here, I could do it. And I wouldn't sit here and be like, okay, well, it's about 10 feet. And so I need, I would just do it. And so I think like trying to put yourself in environments where you can sharpen your instincts and not overthink it, but become comfortable with the process of it. And I mean, obviously when we talk about getting good at something too, there's like an information piece that you need to have. And then there's instincts you need to sharpen. And a lot of people talk about Malcolm Gladwell, who wrote a book. And in the book, he talked about in order to become world-class at something, you do it 10,000 hours was the premise. And then since then, there's been like a lot of information that's come out that's, you know, people always trying to debunk things and talk about things. And he was just trying to put some scientific numbers to like, if you're an amazing violin player, if you're a world-class, you know, painter, if you're like, how much time are these people investing? And without a doubt, a lot of time is needed. There's nobody's trying to argue that, but
Right.
there's a lot of things that we do and spend a lot of time that we don't, time doesn't always equate to better, because it has to be intentional and instructed time. And then you have to start thinking about, okay, if I reverse engineer all these components, like how is it actually going to be intentional time and instructional time? And that's where like I've even talked to golfers and stuff, because I don't golf, but I've been curious about how they get good at something that is so similar to wing shooting or casting or whatever. And, you know, sometimes 10 to 15 minutes, or like training dogs.
Yeah.
10 to 15, yeah, like 10 to 15 minutes in the right headspace, intentional, instructional, doing it the right way is actually better than every day doing it for an hour. And, you know, 3 times a week is better than doing it 5 times a week and then 5 months off and then 5 times. So I think people actually, if you really want to get good at something, you need to have somewhat of a plan for it. And so for me, like in my life, I'm trying to work on casting, because that's been a huge barrier in certain situations where had I been a better caster, I would have had more success. I would have been able to present, you know, the fly to the fish, you know, whether it's reach 'em or accuracy or speed. And so then but you don't just go out there and just start flinging a rod around. You got to actually try to create environments that are similar to what you're going to do. So like, obviously if you get lots of shots on redfish, that's going to translate to bonefish. But like, you also have this component of, you were talking about the gloves with the gun, right?
Right.
So like, well, you should probably shoot with your gloves on if you always have gloves on when you go shoot trap, you know?
Yeah,
or
sure.
if you're like, for me, when I first started duck hunting, and I'm not a great duck hunter by any means, I was always like practice shooting standing up, but I was always shooting sitting down because I was hunting out of a canoe. And so it's like, well, you need to practice sitting down. And that's where it becomes like actually like good to have a level of intentionality too, to say, okay, like you're not trying to go compete in the Olympics for shooting trap. You're trying to shoot ducks, and the way that you shoot ducks is sitting down. So you need to like actually have intentional instruction about it. Tell me a little bit too with you, you know, you've gotten into a couple different types of things. We talked some last podcasts about, you know, you enjoy fly fishing. It's not the predominant thing you do. You know, you do much more hunting and waterfowl, it seems like, than fishing. But like when you get around older guys and you look at where they're at and you look at where you're at as a younger guy doing it, what do you feel like is the big chasm between world class and that kind of aspiring foot at the mountain for you?
Goes back to that 10,000 hours, right? They didn't get there from wishful thinking. Like, they've spent hours and hours being out there doing it. You know, if you see somebody that, I'll take for example, I took my 5-year-old out in the woods. We were walking around for squirrels, you know, just go do something. And I'm listening to him walking. He's like, ksh, 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 ksh. He's just stomping through the woods. I'm like, hey, you're making all this racket. Like, we'll never hear anything.
Mm-hmm.
And from that, I wanted him to be in the woods because I started training his eyes. Right? Like, you don't realize it, but if you don't go out there in the woods, like, let's get away from even trying to shoot a squirrel or find them. So you have an idea, like, there's a bunch of squirrels and where the hardwoods meet the pines kind of deal, and this is where I tend to find them, and they like this big tree. The squirrel did. Well, if you start walking in there and your eyes aren't used to movement and people don't get it, like, you won't see it, right? Like, they're camouflaged naturally for a reason because most people don't pick up on it. And you will subconsciously start, once you see them, and then you start training yourself to see that, you're like, oh, I saw this little flick in a branch, and that, hey, guess what? There's no leaves on the trees right now. So it wasn't like there was a leaf that should be flicking. That's something different. And these little elements will start to stick out. And that only comes from repetition. And that's what you see, I think, from what I would say the guru level, right? They've done it so much that they pick up on the smallest nuances. Mm-hmm. And if you ask them, they probably don't even realize what's going on. And I mean, I'm no guru by any means. And I think just the stuff now, having my son who's 5 years old or my daughter that's 8 go out with me, and as I try to pass this information down, I start realizing like, wow, I never thought that I was doing this. I didn't even think it was a thing. But I realized the building blocks of, I can't tell them, let's go walk, and you need to just look for a squirrel or whatever it may be, right?
Yeah.
But it's like, hey, let's put them out there in that environment and see what they absorb. And then almost like a debriefing when you come back, like, what did you notice today? It's funny. He started making squirrel noises. And like, I was like, where'd you hear that? He's like, oh, he's like, I heard you do it. And then I heard them. And so
He's calling them in.
Yeah. He's like,
Yeah.
So
Mating call.
Yeah. It's like
I only shoot drakes. I only shoot male squirrels.
I only shoot the male quail.
Yeah.
Captain Croker. And so you don't realize all the elements that it takes to get to this point because you absorb so many of them by being around other people. Mm-hmm. I think when you step back and bring somebody new, almost like aids you in that, of realizing like, man, these are these components that would have helped this person go further.
It forces you to kind of break it down, which is a lot of what we're talking about, is trying to break everything down into sizable pieces so that you can kind of, hey, like, you're not going to go out the first time and become, this person's been doing it for 20 years. You're not going to get 20 years in 20 hours, but you can get 20 years in 5 hours if you can take some of the things that they broke down and be more intentional, because some people have to learn things the hard way or the long way. So like anytime somebody teaches you something, because they've already paid a lot of dumb tax and made mistakes, and I went 2 years before I realized this thing, like if you take the lessons from them, it can totally change your learning curve, where we can train people to, you know, do things faster than we've ever done before, because people who've already mastered said thing have spent time trying to figure out how to break it down and make it more digestible. And you know, that's a great point with kids, because it makes you think through like, oh, I didn't even think about how I walk through the woods. I walk through quietly, but I wasn't even thinking consciously, oh, I need to be really quiet. You just do it. And that goes back to the wing shooting. If you can do something and get a level of comfort where it becomes instinctual, back to episode 1, it frees up your cognitive load to work on the next said thing. And until that becomes natural. And then that's where, like, you talked about these great guys that I've been around. Like, I asked my dad one time, I said, how do you assess your anglers when they come on your boat? And my dad does a lot of spin fishing, and he says he always pays attention to, like, when they grab the rod. So if you were fishing with my dad and you grab a spin rod, the first thing that you should do is grab the line and pull it to make sure the drag is tightened to the right amount. Because people just it's just instinctive. They're just like, I'm not going to like cast at a fish if the drag's loose, because you should store your reel with the drag loose. And so maybe the captain didn't do that or whatever, but like it becomes instinct. They just do it. They didn't even think like, okay, what's my protocol here? You know, get out a card. And so I think that's a really important part, is like, okay, like I need to not just know what to do, but like, that's one thing to know what to do. It's another thing to do what you need to do without having to use a bunch of cognitive energy to get there. And that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. I mean, I do it with chips, and I started kind of like realizing it, that I start assessing it when I pull up to it. I see the hole. I'm like, oof, dude, that hole's been rubbed down the dock so many times. It hasn't been in a shipyard in God knows how long. Probably means that this company doesn't put much money into their maintenance budget, which means that their crew either, or if they do have the money, the crew doesn't care about it. And so therefore the captain doesn't. I'm like, which is going to lead, it's like a whole pyramid, right? I'm like, this engine could be in like disrepair, because they don't care about what it looks like. All they're focused on is something else. I guess we'll see. And then I get on there, and some of them stink. You're like, oof, this place is dirty, right? It's like my mom was always huge when we were kids about being presentable when we went somewhere. I was like, why can't I just go in flip-flops and shorts? She's like, because you're setting a tone when you go in there, right? It's like, don't judge a book by its cover, but that's not always the case. Maybe you should. You don't have to. That's not a hard judgment. It doesn't say the book is going to be terrible, but it's going to give you an idea what it's like.
Yeah.
And so like steps, like If I go up there and everybody's sloppily dressed, or the captain doesn't address me right away, or they're like, papers are everywhere, I'm like, this place is run shoddily.
Yeah.
Which probably means that their crew is all halfway incompetent.
Yeah.
And
learning how to make all those assessments on those information points.
Yeah, and it goes back to it just happening subconsciously. I'm not going through my checklist of like, was it dirty in here, and how was this? But all that stuff carries over, and they probably don't even realize it. It's like why big corporations bring in fancy people to
be outside eyes. Yeah,
and be like, God, you guys didn't even realize that. By leaving all this stuff adrift over here, you were wasting time searching for maybe the document that you need because you didn't make a good filing system.
Mm-hmm.
Seems silly. I'm like, oh, look at all that time you guys wasted. You could have been doing something way more productive.
Mm-hmm.
Which goes back to the hunting and fishing thing. How do you not suck more? Be brutally honest. Let your ego get thrown out the window and put it down, pen and paper. Like, what can I work on? What is one element? Let's focus our attention. What's one element I can get better at before I go into it so that it makes my time out there that much better? Mm-hmm. And if you achieve that, you don't need to show up like, oh yeah, I know how to tie my own flies and I can do all this fancy knot work and like, oh, I know exactly where I should be. And it's like, you probably don't. And if you don't try to fake it till you make it. It's not going to be beneficial, especially if you go with somebody that does know what they're doing.
Yeah.
Like they're going to see
They're going to see through it. And nothing will stop you from getting somewhere faster than pretending like you're already there. Boom. I think that's an important part. And then one of the things that I would say that I've begun to do more and more and more is when I get opportunities to be around people who are better than me, which is a lot, and it doesn't take a lot in certain areas. I try to honestly being brutally honest with myself, but also being honest with that person about things I'm struggling with or what might be going on that day. And, or not that day, but in the season I'm at and learning in this journey, and then trying to actually communicate that with them. So if I was going duck hunting with you, I'd be like, John, I'm really excited to go duck hunting. Hey man, just gonna be honest, not a great shot, trying to work on it. What that's going to do is that's going to help you actually begin to think, okay, maybe I'll put Hunter by this guy because I know he's a good coach.
Yep.
And then also I can actually invite people into now that I want your feedback. Hey man, if you see something that I'm doing wrong, feel free to let me know. I'm trying to get better at this. Sure. Because some people are just they're going to see you doing something and they're just going to be like, I don't really know if I want to go there. I don't know if maybe he's just trying to have fun, just hunting. He doesn't want to, he doesn't want me to necessarily interrupt that with instruction. And so I think that's a really big piece too, is be honest with yourself, invite other people into the process, find great people, deconstruct what they do. And I think have fun along the way, man.
That's it. It's a big one. Have fun and, take it in small doses and then give yourself a little break every now and then.
Yeah. Celebrate the wins. Hey man,
that's it.
This is great. I just had this happen. I just had this opportunity and I capitalized on it, and pat yourself on the back and enjoy it and stop pretending. So hopefully that's some helpful stuff, man. Some good tidbits and help people get better.
One step at a time, right?
That's right.